Hi everyone, Elitist Datto here, and I'm just really tired. Before you get mad at me for what I'm going to say in this video, just know that Bungie has already folded to community demands. They nerfed Counterfeit already, so I'm just yapping just to yap. That fight's over. Let me yap for a few minutes here, and you can move on, knowing that this feedback is just being screamed into a black hole. Recently, Bungie has been trying some new modifiers in the game. Some of them a negative modifier to make the game more challenging. And all I've seen is constant bashing of these modifiers. Some of it deserved, some really not. And I'm just losing the will to continue to have discussions on this kind of stuff pretty much at all anymore. Partly because, at least very recently, Bungie immediately folded. And partly because it feels like people will never be happy no matter what. It feels like a pointless conversation to even have anymore. From things that I've been reading recently about these new modifiers, it truly does not feel that people want any form of difficulty, any form of struggle in this game at all. I don't think it's really people just misunderstand how the modifiers work kind of a situation, although it very well could be. I just think that it is another case of players thinking that Bungie making things difficult or making changes is a punishment because they hate us. I feel more like it is a case of this used to be like this, now it's different, or it's harder, or it's changed. Bungie hates us, and I hate them for doing this to us. Every time Bungie tries to make something different or difficult, they immediately get bashed. Every form of difficulty outside of 2 days out of the year is almost universally panned, and I'm just really tired of playing the other side. At this point, I'm just kind of like, yeah, all right, fine. Do whatever you want. I don't care anymore. What forms of difficulty currently exist in the game or have existed? We have your increased health and damage on enemies, otherwise known in pretty much only this community as artificial difficulty. We have encounter mechanics, although I think people are talking about stuff beyond your typical stand on the plate, throw the ball mechanics that you would find in everyday activities. We're talking real mechanics here. We have timers, where the game demands some form of efficiency from its players in order to complete some kind of a challenge. And finally, the main driver of this video, activity modifiers. While I tend to sympathize a lot with the hatred of things like famine or glass or something like that, Bungie was trying some new stuff recently that I thought was at least more interesting. Okay. Artificial difficulty. Boosted enemy health and damage, the most traditional way of increasing difficulty in all video games pretty much ever, is commonly viewed in this community as lazy and uninspired. I'll give you that it's not the most creative way in the world to boost up difficulty, but it is certainly an easy way to provide some kind of increased combat challenge. Bungie also boosts the efficiency of the enemy's combat prowess, their AI, if you will, to be more accurate, more aggressive, the works. And despite that, I still frequently see people ask for better enemy AI. People pretty much universally hate this method of difficulty increase. Fine. But it is easier to make happen than some other things. Next, the people yearn for mechanics. They desperately want everything to have a mechanic, despite the fact that we still have people complaining that even the most basic of mechanics or instructions are ignored by tons of players. Whether that's the player's fault for not learning or Bungie's fault for not exactly teaching these things is not what I'm looking to discuss at the moment. For some reason, mechanical difficulty is okay in people's heads, unless it's too much, like something like Valka, but combat difficulty is almost never allowed. And these aren't even dungeon or raid level mechanics that I'm talking about. We're talking basic reading comprehension in Tomb of Elders level mechanics. Dungeon and raid mechanics have historically stayed in those places because those are the highest tiers of content in the game and typically require advanced knowledge of the game in order to complete, meaning their existence is more justified in those activities. While I would love for these kinds of mechanics to be introduced into a Grandmaster Strike, it hasn't happened, it probably never will. If it does, it would likely be in this next era of the game coming in 2025, assuming Bungie has some sort of philosophical change of heart. GMs are just a different style of endgame content. Bungie wants the mechanics and the advanced thinking stuff to be in raids and dungeons, and perhaps they just want GMs to be more of a test of your combat abilities. Both forms of content and difficulty are allowed to exist. Next up, we have any kind of a timer. Timers are a great way for games to nudge players along at a certain pace of play, meaning you can't take all the time in the world to complete an activity. It is the urgency of the situation that creates the difficulty. You need to know your stuff so that you can progress quick enough. I cannot recall a single time where people saw that there was a timer on an activity and didn't immediately hate it, maybe outside of something like Whisper or Outbreak missions because they were novelties. Timers have been hated in Destiny, going all the way back to Destiny 2 launch when Nightfalls had a timer and you needed to do a certain objective to extend it. Bungie continues to use timers in certain pieces of content here and there, most recently certain critical objectives in Tomb of Elders and the first encounter in Vesper's Host during the contest mode, and we have people rage quitting Tomb of Elders if they fail a single critical objective as a result. Banes are a relatively new addition to the game, where certain enemies will be granted with a unique skill that makes them more of a threat than the average enemy. Most of them are a bit tame right now in most parts of the game, but generally speaking, I like the idea behind them. Sort of champion-esque in nature, an enemy that sticks out a bit more and has to be dealt with in a special way. I'm not going to go over the individual balancing of each Bane here, but generally speaking, they're a neat idea to spice up combat in higher difficulty tiers. By extension, champions have existed for a long time now, and people also hate them, although I would say that they're considerably more tolerable to deal with since the Lightfall champion's stunning adjustments. I think a lot of people miss the fact that in my Inverted Spire video that I was running Stasis and a Chill Clip Fusion, which yes, does deal with overload champions without much hassle. Champions don't appear to be going away for the foreseeable future, and they've been in the game this long that I think people have just accepted them as a form of difficulty via loadout requirements. So, no increasing the damage of enemies, no increasing their health pool, no adjustments allowed to them really whatsoever. You can't have extra mechanics beyond the basics, and we can't have speed play a factor, and we're completely over champions for that matter as well. We can't have health-gated bosses. We cannot have immunity phases either. That leaves modifiers, in which this latest batch is also a massive issue for the community. What I think people dislike about these newer modifiers, which is part of the reason that I like them, is that certain ones are build agnostic. Some of them, like Counterfeit, like Haste, cannot be build crafted out of. They cannot be completely nullified by switching an armor mod around, or changing your subclass, or putting on an exotic. They are just something that you need to figure out how to deal with in the best possible way in the moment, in the heat of gameplay, which introduces its own set of challenges that you need to learn to overcome. They are dynamic. You cannot just do the exact same thing that you've been doing this whole time. You need to adapt, you need to come up with a new game plan, you need to play a different way in order to succeed compared to how you would normally play. With some other modifiers, they directly interfere with your buildcraft and are trying to push you into the unfamiliar. And these are things that Destiny players, at least vocal ones, just hate doing. They hate being pushed to do something that they're not used to doing, or simply just don't want to deal with them at all, despite that being the entire point of these modifiers. Let's go over them. Some of them are more interesting than others, some of them I like, some of them I don't. Let's start with Counterfeit. Counterfeit was where enemies could drop a fate brick of ammo, or even an exotic engram, and if you got too close, it would explode, hurting you in the process. The way you could tell it was fake was by 1, shooting it, and if it exploded, it was fake, or 2, getting close to it and watching it glow brightly. A pretty funny mechanic inspired by the Trickster boss from Forsaken. People did not find this very funny, apparently, like at all. Now, when this modifier was active on the Lightblade GM, which I think had the arc threat modifier as well, increasing Counterfeit's lethality, I only got to do a couple of attempts at it, with my second attempt being successful. The next day I had to go to London, so I only had 1 day of gaming in me. And despite me playing on what one would think would be a terrible build for such a situation in a Consecration Titan, I was able to overcome this challenge without too much stress, at least stress related to Counterfeit. The reason is because that I knew that Counterfeit was a way to try to push me out of melee and finisher range of enemies, lest I risk getting killed in the process. It was Bungie's way of saying, hey, if you play with a certain kind of setup, you are at more risk of dying to this modifier, so maybe consider trying something different for this challenge. And rule number 1 comes flying in. If you force Destiny players to change something about their playstyle, about their loadout, their one way of doing something, and it's not in an overwhelmingly beneficial way for them, they will be upset about it. If this modifier was named, you have a 25% chance of dying if you melee kill an enemy, people would still melee kill enemies and then complained that they died. This was not a challenging modifier to overcome. All it took was playing the activity a little bit slower and being a little more aware of your surroundings the first couple of times through. That is all Bungie was asking of players. Be more aware of your surroundings and maybe try a slightly different but still completely overpowered build. And that apparently was too much of an ask. Bungie has since neutered this modifier in the latest patch to the point where they could probably just remove it completely from the game now. I understand that in lesser difficulty content that having Counterfeit around might have been less of a I need to play strategically vibe and more of a dude, it's Vanguard Ops, leave me alone vibe. But at the same time, it's Vanguard Ops. There is nothing at stake to get that upset about when it comes to these modifiers. Next up, we have Haste, where the game is asking you to move around. Otherwise, you're going to take a little bit of damage until you start moving. In Tomb of Elders, this shouldn't be a problem at all. The main issue felt like it was in the revamped Inverted Spire Strike, which I thought was a fantastic first-time playthrough, but I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that everyone hates it because it's actually kind of hard now and it's longer to do. Okay. Haste was another modifier that didn't greatly impact my experience playing because the game told me that if I stayed moving, not only would I not take damage over time, I would actually be healing myself for doing so. I am moving most of the time anyway, standing still for only very specific scenarios. I strafe back and forth a lot when I'm playing, so maybe if you aren't used to doing that, or maybe you're just used to the plink-plonk lifestyle of a scout rifle, this was a bit more debilitating for you, which was the entire point. This modifier is basically, you can't just sit in the back and plink-plonk. Outside of the GM space, I really don't see this modifier being a significant pain point pretty much at all. Even in the Inverted Spire GM, it was rarely an issue. I have barely noticed it in Tomb of Elders, and the only reason I have was because of the disable the poison mechanic, where I stand still to disable said poison. And even the poison and standing still damage over time of Haste is still not even close to being that lethal. Brawn is where you get dramatically increased health, but you only regenerate it when you kill orange bar enemies or higher. But you can also heal with something like recuperation orbs. In Birthplace of the Vile, which isn't a terribly hard GM to begin with, this was a complete non-factor of a modifier. In fact, if you think that Brawn is a negative modifier, that is one of the biggest self-reports you could possibly do, because that tells me you simply take way too much damage in normal gameplay and thus have not built enough awareness and familiarity with the content here for you to be successful. If you know what you're doing, this is way more of a buff than it is a nerf, as there are plenty of enemies to kill to regenerate your health. Or you could just make a bunch of orbs and heal that way. Then we got something like Blast, which isn't nearly as interesting of a modifier on paper. This is just enemies doing more splash damage, which is something that can already feel inconsistent in the game, especially as a Titan who relies on barricades for defense and frequently finds himself still taking splash damage, although recent buffs have made this a little less painful. This forces you to be a bit more aware of like enemies throwing grenades, but if you're a seasoned GM player, you're probably already doing this. If anything, this modifier actually makes you respect some of the enemies you're fighting against, something we haven't had to do in quite a long time outside of contest mode. I can understand being underwhelmed by this modifier though. Any other sort of similar modifier, Chill Touch, Scrapper, not really as interesting, doesn't really change the way that I play that much. Those two modifiers have to do with melee attacks, but it's pretty much built into the brains of Destiny players at this point that if enemies are getting within melee range, that you're either poorly positioned, or you're playing some sort of a melee-based setup, or maybe you're playing against a bunch of Thrall. These just punish you a little bit more than usual for lack of awareness or playing a melee build, of which most melee builds in the game are very strong. Oscillation, which I didn't even get to play with because it got bullied out of the game that quickly, never had a chance in the first place with the community because it assigned specific weapons that people had to use. I remember people hating Prestige Leviathan raids because Bungie would only enable specific loadouts for Prestige week over week, so the challenge was to beat it with a specific loadout only. And if people hated it back then, there was no reason to hate something like this now. It forced certain loadouts, and then also forced certain weapons rotations while playing. I think I saw something about maybe the damage buffs not really being worth it, or just being very, very weak. That could have been adjusted. Savathun's worm, I thought, was a positive modifier that basically just said, use this element and you'll do good. But there appears to be some clashing with the surge mod that happens to be active on a certain activity. Some people have this idea that they must play with a surge boosted element, otherwise they will fail. Now, there's not exactly a reason to not use a surge boosted weapon in an activity, but considering what you can do when you actually embrace this modifier, this is probably something that you can let slide for a GM or two. You fill the meter so ridiculously fast, and the boosted effect lasts 20 seconds. This effect is so good that I refuse to believe people actually have a problem with this. Like, there's no way. If you completely ignore the mechanic, shocker, you're going to be hindered by taking more damage and having less energy, but that's the point. Follow the modifier. Although apparently the negative portion of this modifier isn't even working properly. Like, tests apparently have been done to show that the reduced energy gains and the increased damage taken is not working. But even if they were working, it is so easy to stay in the positive that I refuse to accept Savathun's worm as an overly negative modifier. Look, I know that negative modifiers aren't really viewed as fun because they get in the way of your success or your build or your plans. The whole point is to overcome the modifier, to overcome the challenge. But I think there's been one negative modifier in the entire game that people kinda liked. And that was mini screams. But they were like broken. I'm talking like crawling under the floor, crawling under geometry broken. We haven't seen them in years. I do think this recent batch of modifiers is the closest Bungie has come to negative modifiers that are a bit more fun than, you know, something like Glass or Famine, even if those do have their own challenges to overcome. But people still view all of these modifiers as not fun in some form of another, but they're one of the last tools that Bungie has to change up gameplay in an engaging way. I realize how insane it is to say that negative modifiers shouldn't always be fun, because the whole point of playing a video game is about fun. I get it. Like, I don't have a good answer to that. I just don't. I find these modifiers fun. I find them engaging in a way that changes up my gameplay experience at least a little bit, but I'm very clearly in the minority here because it feels like people view Bungie adding anything that changes how they play the game as a punishment, if it's a negative thing, more than a way to make a thing more engaging. It's not a punishment. It's just Bungie trying to make things a little bit different and interesting. So if Bungie can't scale up content by increasing enemy health, by increasing their damage, by having health gates or immunity phases, if they can't use timers, and if they won't use more complex mechanics or modifiers that affect the status quo, then like, what? There's nothing left. What's left? I think Banes are cool. Are we at least embracing Banes? Like, more dynamic gameplay situations instead of the same spawns in the same places every single time? Like, please tell me we're cool with Banes. Please. A common suggestion, the most common suggestion of trying to increase difficulty that I've seen is death by 1,000 cuts. Simply add more weaker enemies to the game so that there's more to deal with. Two issues with this in my eyes. Number one, memory constraints. Bungie has said that they're already putting in the most amount of enemies they ever have into some of these more recent activities, but there are only so many enemies that can be put on your screen at once. At some point, a limit will be reached if we're not already there. Bungie has already been introducing more and more enemies over time, and it's done very little to slow people down. I don't know if we're at the cap yet, but I'm guessing, at least with some old hardware still in the mix, that maybe there's not that much more room before we hit the ceiling on this. Number two is that we already have the tools to deal with this difficulty increase suggestion. A few more dinky enemies on the screen is not going to stop Trinity Ghoul from just destroying everything, or whatever other weapon that is just insanely good from destroying everything. It's not going to stop any of these insane builds from destroying everything. So, if people hate being forced to endure any kind of difficulty adjustment that Bungie wants to make or try, what is the solution? Well, I think they're working on it right now. Instead of Bungie making any of the adjustments to the difficulty, it'll be you. It'll be you, the player, doing however much difficulty adjusting you want to do, and that will determine the quality of the loot that you get. We've had similar systems in the game before, but never developed out to the degree that Bungie appears that they will be doing in their 2025 expansion launch, whenever that is. June, July, I don't know. It's been a long time coming, and it's probably something that should have had more time put into it by now, but hopefully it can address this very glaring issue in the community going forward. The people who want to crush their skulls can do that, and the people who just want to coast can do that. And we can just all have our own separate paths that we go on. And I'm really hoping the system works out for the best. I do have other concerns with a system like this, but if they come to fruition, then we'll talk about it then. All right, I'm done. Sorry. I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated when I feel like Bungie actually does kind of like a neat thing, and they just get shit on for it, or like they do something different or something I find interesting that just gets shit on. I will not talk about difficulty anymore until Apollo releases, probably to the pleasure of a bunch of you watching. So don't worry, I'm done. All this is getting screamed into the void anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the new system with Apollo. All right. Until then, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.